You've probably heard Hatshepsut called Egypt's female pharaoh, like that's the whole story. It isn't. That label is the myth. The truth is, she wasn't playing dress up in a king's crown for symbolism. She was running the largest economic operation Egypt had attempted in 500 years, and the beard on her chin was the least interesting thing about her. Picture this: a fleet of ships being carried in pieces across open desert, rebuilt by hand at the edge of the Red Sea because the trade route to the land of Punt had been abandoned for so long that nobody alive had actually sailed it. She sent them anyway. Somewhere between a forgotten shipping lane and a treasury she controlled personally, Hatshepsut became one of the richest rulers in the ancient world, and almost nobody remembers her for it. So here's the real question. If this was one of the most successful economic campaigns in Egyptian history, why did the next pharaoh spend years trying to erase every trace that she existed? Here's what surprises people first. Hatshepsut didn't start with a war, a conquest, or even a coronation people accepted. She started with the treasury. As regent for a child king, she placed herself in direct control of the Temple of Amun, Egypt's richest institution, wealthier in gold reserves than most kingdoms of the era combined. That's not a symbolic move. That's the equivalent of a new executive skipping the corner office entirely and walking straight into the vault. Within a few years, she wasn't managing the treasury. She was pharaoh full crown, false beard, statues carved with the king's traditional broad shoulders. Historians spent a century treating that as vanity. It wasn't. In Egyptian religious law, the office of pharaoh was inseparable from male kingship. If she wanted the economic authority of the throne, she needed the visual language of the throne too. That's not deception. That's someone reading the actual rules of the system and using them exactly as written. Here's the part that gets left out of the textbook version. Hatshepsut was around 15 when she was contracted into a political marriage to her half-brother, Thutmose, the second standard practice for consolidating royal bloodlines, not romance. When he died young, she wasn't handed power. She built the case for it, piece by piece, inscription by inscription, over almost a decade. While a small child sat on the throne she was technically just protecting. You'd expect the next move to be defensive, consolidate, protect the crown, wait it out. It wasn't. She expanded. Here's what nobody explains correctly. The Punt expedition wasn't a diplomatic gesture. It was a hostile takeover of a supply chain. For centuries, incense used in nearly every Egyptian religious ritual, myrrh, frankincense, had to be imported through unreliable middlemen. Egypt's entire spiritual economy depended on a trade good it didn't control. Hatshepsut decided that was unacceptable. Imagine standing at the edge of the eastern desert, watching laborers haul disassembled ship hulls across dry land for days, just to rebuild them at the coastline, because there was no direct river route to the Red Sea. That's not romantic exploration. That's brutal, expensive, high-risk logistics, approved by a ruler who was willing to gamble years of resources on cutting out a middleman. It worked. The ships came back loaded with gold, ebony, ivory, exotic animal skins, and something no expedition had ever brought home before. 31 living myrrh trees, root balls wrapped, replanted at her mortuary temple at Deir el-Bahri. That detail matters more than people realize. She wasn't just importing a product anymore. She was importing the source of the product permanently onto Egyptian soil. It's the ancient equivalent of a company that stops buying a raw material overseas and instead buys the entire mine. But here's what nobody talks about. Every one of those trees, every ounce of that gold, ran through channels she personally controlled. The wealth wasn't flowing to Egypt in the abstract, it was flowing to her. This is where the story usually gets simplified into she was a great builder, and that framing hides something important. Yes, Hatshepsut used this wealth to construct one of the most architecturally advanced temples Egypt had ever seen. But here's the reframe almost nobody makes. Her power was never really about the crown, or even the gold. It was about controlling who got to interpret divine will, because in Egypt, that interpretation is what justified every tax, every conscripted worker, every temple donation. By tying the Punt expedition directly to the god Amun, carving it permanently into sacred temple walls, she made her economic policy indistinguishable from religious law. Criticizing her trade decisions wasn't just politically risky, it was, on paper, close to blasphemy. That's the real mechanism, not a woman who wanted to look like a king. A ruler who understood that in her world, Economic power and religious authority were the same lever, and she was the only one with her hand on it. And this is where it gets interesting, because that same machine she built made the priesthood of Amun exponentially richer too. Every temple donation, every offering tied to her military and trade success flowed through their hands as well as hers. She wasn't just building her own wealth, she was accidentally building the one institution capable of outlasting her. Something was about to break, and it wasn't obvious yet. For over 20 years, Hatshepsut's Egypt experienced something rare in the ancient world: sustained peace, sustained trade, and a treasury that kept growing instead of being drained by war. Then she died, likely from illness, possibly complications related to a skin condition worsened by medicinal treatments. Not violence, not scandal. Just an ordinary human ending to an extraordinary economic reign. Her stepson, Thutmose III, finally took the throne he'd technically held since childhood. For years, nothing happened. Then, quietly, systematically, her name began disappearing. Statues smashed, cartouches chiseled from monuments, her image replaced with his, or with the names of earlier, safely dead kings. It wasn't rage, it was calculated. Sentences short, method precise. This was an erasure with a plan behind it. Here's the consequence nobody expects, and it's the twist that makes this story worth telling. The Punt reliefs at Deir el-Bahri survived. The trade infrastructure survived. The gold kept moving through the exact channels she built. And Thutmose III, the same king who ordered her erased from Egyptian memory, went on to become one of the most successful military pharaohs in history, funding campaign after campaign using the treasury she filled. He didn't dismantle her system. He inherited it silently, spent from it, and took credit for the empire it built. That's not so different from a modern successor who removes the founder's name from the building while running the company entirely on the systems she designed. New leadership, same engine, or think of it like a startup acquired and rebranded. The founder's name disappears from the press releases, but the product, the supply chain, the client relationships, all of it keeps running exactly as she built it. Erase the person, keep the machine. Historically, that's almost always been the more profitable move. So here's the uncomfortable truth underneath all of it. Hatshepsut spent 20 years proving that economic infrastructure outlives political memory, and then became the clearest example in ancient history of exactly that principle, applied against her own legacy. A chisel can erase a name from stone in an afternoon. It cannot unplant a myrrh tree, unfund a temple, or reverse 2 decades of trade relationships. She understood the system well enough to master it. She just never accounted for the one variable she couldn't control: who got to write the ending. To recap, she seized the treasury before she seized the crown, rebuilt a 500-year dead trade route by brute force logistics, fused her economic policy with religious law so tightly no one could challenge one without challenging the other, and built a fortune so structurally embedded in Egypt that even the king who erased her name couldn't afford to erase the system underneath it. That's not vanity. That's one of the most sophisticated economic strategies of the ancient world, hiding behind a false beard. And there's one thread we still haven't pulled. Nearly 3,000 years later, in 1903, archaeologists found her body missing from her own tomb, moved, hidden, misidentified for decades in a museum drawer. Someone protected her remains long after they tried to erase her name. We still don't fully know who or why. So which one do you think mattered more in the end, being remembered, or building something that keeps running even when your name gets chiseled off it? Because Hatshepsut only ever got one of those. Tell me which one you choose down in the comments.